So thank you for joining us. I would like to welcome our panel. We have Dr. Kelly Hammett, who is the Director and Program Executive Officer for the Space Rapid Capabilities Office. We have Victor Vigliotti, who is the Director for Space Front Door with U.S. Space Force, and Al Tadros, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Redwire. And so we have a nice mix of perspective between government and commercial. Sadly, we are missing Carissa, who was supposed to be with us, but unfortunately is sick. So Al will be carrying the commercial sector load for the panel today.
Apparently Al didn't get the memo. It was Blue Suit Day.
I know, I left my suit in the green room.
All right, so I was thinking that we'd do a little bit of an arc for this particular panel, where first we're gonna start about talking what is the threat, and we're actually being incredibly inclusive in what we're covering down on the threat. So everything from nation-state actors to natural threats to supply chain and possibly even policy. Anything that interferes with us being able to accomplish the mission that we're setting out to accomplish. And then the next part is going to figure out how are we responding to that threat. And then finally, what is out there on the horizon. So with that, I'll start with setting the stage that space is no longer a sanctuary. And I think people have come to different levels of acceptance with that. And so the question is how should we reframe our understanding of the threat landscape? First, I want to ask Victor, what keeps you up at night?
No, absolutely. What keeps me up at night, especially with regard to the space domain, I'd say is the adversaries' ability to just very rapidly integrate commercial solutions to their space warfighting architecture. I think they're able to use innovative technologies like an ability to refuel on orbit, which is made prevalent in recent reports on things like the SJ-25, which absolutely keeps me up at night, because I think back a few years ago, back to 2022, working at U.S. Space Command, where we were consistently advocating for capabilities that could do things like refueling on orbit, and then news reports started coming out that the adversaries figured it out, right? So that specifically keeps me up at night, is just the slow progress within our own construct right now, and the inability to just very rapidly get after that from commercial innovation.
Excellent. So with the commercial angle there, Al, I want to ask you, what do you think are the most overlooked or misunderstood threats?
So first of all, as a technologist, I see a lot of opportunities to deploy capabilities into the warfighting regime. A lot of it is not technology-paced, however. It is policy, regulatory, programs of record, paced, and some of that is understandable, but at moments of crisis, I also see opportunities where things are accelerated, so I know it is possible. Redwire recently acquired a UAS company, which is deploying capabilities directly into the hands of the warfighter on a regular basis, and they have a much more rapid technology adoption pace. I think that is one of the biggest things that the U.S. can now implement. It's not so much technologies, but technology adoption and deployment, and the cycle of determining the threat, the change of threats, and then the response to those changes. That OODA loop is something that we can do a lot better at.
Actually, I love that you're bringing up speed, because then I'll turn to the Rapid Capabilities Office. What are the threat signals that are most shaping how you are prioritizing, designing, and deploying capabilities? And then how do you think about risk, speed, and the need to respond to threats quickly?
So I think a couple things. One is you set the stage by saying it's no longer a peaceful, benign environment. I will say that's absolutely true. That's been going on for over a decade, and what I will say is the Space Force in particular, it's great that we can be in a forum like this, even unclassified, where we can talk about these things. Space Force has made a large shift to take a very public tack in pointing out the threats. We send people around to a lot of unclassified venues and conferences to talk about these things and educate people, because there's just a different level of understanding. For me, it is the wide variety of spacefaring nations that have really made a commitment, I think, to dominate in the space domain, and the variety of capabilities in particular that China and Russia are launching. I have 2 full-time intelligence analysts that sit in my office, and every week, one of them's name is Brad, and he gives me the Brad news. every week, and it's a little bit discouraging to see the pace and the scale at which capabilities are being fielded into the domain that threaten the U.S. Space Force posture and our commercial capabilities. So it is daunting, and being the organization, the acquisition organization, the Space Force that's trying to keep up with those things is daunting. So what do we have to do? We have to be very smart in scoping our programs. We have to be just right-sized in terms of requirements and technology maturity levels. I was having a conversation at lunch about how do we bring more entrants into the pipeline to bring the capabilities rapidly that we need. It's a very complex ecosystem with multiple players, multiple different funding lines. I was kind of talking a little bit about that. You kind of have to matriculate new companies and new capabilities through a variety of steps and processes to get them to where I can take advantage of them. But I will say we've been very active in that area in the 3 years that I've been in Space RCO. We are starting to see more non-traditional entrants come in and have useful capabilities, and it's things like Victor is talking about. We, by virtue of the fact that we've had a board of directors with both the Combatant Command, U.S. Space Command, and the CSO, and the Service Acquisition Executive, as well as the Secretary of the Air Force sitting on, we get a lot of demand signal from all these parties to go fast, to keep up. And so we have tried to be first adopters for sustained space maneuver, for dynamic space operations, for the types of capabilities that you will need to compete and eventually win if we go into conflict in space. And so it is full contact program management for us. We're involved in all those ecosystems, trying to stimulate the industrial base, trying to bring new entrants in, and we really don't care. So one of the ways we de-risk on speed is we try to go for 18 players, guys who will deliver. But you have to understand, again, the technology maturity, and a lot of these new companies, Redwire, others, that are out there are hungry, as Al just alluded to, and they're willing to take risk. They're willing to partner with us in some non-traditional ways of doing things. In terms particularly of the acquisition style that we use, our last 3 acquisitions, we have used FAR Part 16 acquisition, which is non-traditional. It's called FOPR, Fair Opportunity Proposal Request, and it takes a lot of the paper and the time out of the process. So I like to say we don't send out 500-page RFPs looking to get 2,000-page proposals back that we spend a year and a half reviewing. We put out about a 10-page RFP, and you get 30 days to come back and convince us that you're an 18 player that's willing to partner with us and come in and do orals. And bring your best guys who are going to say, this is what we can do, and you'll look me in the eye and you'll convince me that you're going to deliver on what you're saying you can do. And it's a much closer partnership with the industrial partners there versus, I'm going to sell you something on paper and then we'll wait a couple of years to see if you're actually going to deliver. And that has worked really well for us in our last 3 acquisitions. So I covered a lot of ground there, but there's a lot that goes into this in terms of right-sizing the requirements, the acquisition approach, picking the right teammates that are willing to jump in the trenches together to be fast. I had the opportunity last night, actually, to brief the Deputy Secretary of Defense on our portfolio, and these were his questions as well. How do we go faster? What's in the way? Give me your list. Let's knock it out. And again, I'll tee this up. Great. UASs and counter UASs. So a major area where this Secretary of Defense said, I'm tired of status quo, I'm going to wipe out the process as usual, and we're going to figure out how to go faster. And the deputy asked us in the space acquisition community for the same thing last night. How do we go faster, and how do we remove some of these barriers that allow us to do that? So a lot of ground. I'll stop. I'll take a breath. I'll have a drink of water.
Victor mentioned about refueling and sustained space maneuvers. For the panel, for the entire panel, sort of technology trends that are game changers in terms of threats that we really need to consider and bring to bear when we start thinking about solutions.
I can start. I've had my whole career is in the space industry. I went to school at MIT. Grad school was in the midst of mid-'80s when the shuttle was going to shuttle things into space on a regular basis, launched commercial satellites, retrieved commercial satellites, did satellite servicing. This was all happening in the 80s, and we expected it to accelerate in the 80s. These were capabilities that 30 years ago were anticipated to be a regular course and still could be a regular course of our business. I believe that those are the bare minimum of where we will get to, because a sustained and genuine space dominance requires you to be able to operate like that, a logistics chain and a presence that persists. I believe wholeheartedly, and I just have a couple charts here just to double stomp what was just said. It's not only building the confidence for our customers to understand what we can do and what we plan to do, but we have to convince ourselves in a very short time frame to say this is what we can do and this is why we believe we can do it. And digital engineering is the basis for a lot of that at Redwire. So we have the tools that we've developed to an ecosystem to define a concept, generate the requirements, flow down the requirements into a program that we can then hand off into a program manager's hands and the team's hands if we are awarded. And that is why our CEO can, bet that we can do it. We can do it for this price on a fixed price basis. And we all get agreement, this is what we're going to do. Digital engineering has a huge amount of capability in our industry that's really under-recognized. It's prevalent in a lot of other industries, much more than in the space industry. And I think we're leveling it up to not only be able to do the upfront ideation, concept development, requirements generation, but then all the way through the program execution and digital twins, in the operations phase, including anomalous operations, and then threats, counter threats in wargaming scenarios. That's where we're going, and that's how we build confidence on a rapid pace that we can do what we're saying. Artificial intelligence, there isn't a session that goes by without AI being mentioned, so I'm going to take the hit here. So we are heavily looking at this from the context of where can it take us beyond traditional approaches. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of technologies that have not been adopted yet, traditional approaches. I'm a guidance, navigation, controls engineer by training, and traditionally, space has been a very conservative industry with regards to autonomy. They want the operator in the loop. They want to go to safe mode. They want to wait and investigate before they take any action. In a warfighting environment and in combat mindset, that isn't always the luxury that we have. Being able to operate and then operate in some kind of degraded not only in a single platform, but in a total constellation or a joint domain, space-air mission, is some of the things that we're looking at doing using artificial intelligence. All this and more is in Golden Dome kind of thinking, and Golden Dome is a multi-domain extraordinaire kind of scenario where the threats are rapidly evolving here, and capabilities from both space, air, and ground are all tasked in order to address the threats. Without digital engineering and some of the AI techniques that we're looking at, we're going to be vastly behind in our capabilities to address threats like this.
So this is actually a perfect lead-in to sort of the second part of our story arc, is how do we mitigate these threats? So I'm going to hand it now over to Victor to sort of talk about the space front door and accelerating capabilities to deliver to address these emerging threats. And also, if you can share examples of reducing friction to getting collaboration with the commercial sector.
No, absolutely. I think with regard to reducing friction, one of the big things that we're going after in the Front Door program is trying to identify every organization out there on the government side that's looking for commercial solutions to their requirements and to their needs, so that we can build this system out to consolidate that data together and have kind of a one-stop shop, not just for industry to go to share their capabilities with the government, but for the government to go to identify solutions to their requirements. So that's one of the ways in which we're trying to reduce friction, and we're also trying to reduce it not just in the Department of Defense, but across those different aspects of the space apparatus to include civil and intelligence, with the integration of organizations like NRO, NGA, NASA, and we're even approaching the international scale as we work to try to facilitate collaboration with organizations like NATO. So we're trying to build out this front door construct again to be able to deliver those capabilities as quickly as possible. That way the warfighter, when he identifies their needs, they can use this one system to find those solutions and have all the forensics associated with that to get after the threat. So we're hoping that that can inform the warfighter a little better and help mitigate threats through some of the things that we're working towards, like our Orbital Watch initiative. Through the Orbital Watch initiative, we're looking to be able to disseminate threat information, fully unclassified, out as rapidly as possible, not only to enable the commercial enterprise to be able to mitigate potential threats on orbit, but to also help them develop their systems in a way that's a little more resilient during those R&D cycles so that they can meet those threats in those times of crisis and contingency.
Excellent. Kelly, how do you balance both that urgency and complexity in acquisition? You talked a little bit about making sure you have tech maturation, but are some other aspects of bringing in the commercial sector and thinking through how to make that collaboration successful?
Yeah, Keelan, there really are, but I'm going to back up just a little bit because I'm not sure we really answered the question about the variety of threats. And so, again, we're talking about this in a much more open fashion, and everything you can think of that you would be scared of in space as a threat to our systems is there. And because we have commercial data that's available watching these things, we can say, we see the Chinese doing refueling, we can see them doing multi-orbit maneuvers with high delta V in rapid cadence. We can say they have put kinetic interceptors on orbit, they have put directed energy weapons in orbit. It is a nasty spectrum of stuff. And so I just wanted to come back and cover that ground, that we see that and we can say that now for probably the first time in maybe recorded history. And there's a willingness to talk about that more because we need to generate public and congressional support to respond. Okay, so now how do we respond? Couple things. We participate regularly in service level force design, bringing new concepts, new capabilities, trying to match those with what we see coming out of the commercial marketplace. Again, in terms of high delta V, high thrust, say bus technology, or refueling capability, or potential space control capabilities on orbit. We're watching that stuff and we're matriculating vendors through this system that's pretty complex, and I'm glad there are others trying to do it as well because it's a team sport to make it happen. Then when you get to the point where we have a requirement for a program that we've been assigned by our board of directors and we're going to get after it, one thing that's really shifted over the last 3 years is putting what I call the NRE, the non-recurring engineering, where it needs to be. So as I just alluded to, if we can take advantage of a commercial bus with a custom payload, that's what we want to do. If we can take advantage of commercial propellant systems, sensors, RPO capabilities, other types of things, we do not want to reinvent that on every program that we have. And that requires us to be smarter buyers and, again, inject those buy decisions. So one of the other things we do, I call it in many forms, I call it speed dating. We are out and about, and we will take a supplier of a subsystem or an assembly, and we'll match them up with a prime and say, you better not come in and propose to me reinventing the thing this guy has for you on the shelf right now. And so getting to that level of granularity in our acquisitions is one of the ways we do that. That speeds us, that de-risks us, but it forces, again, that kind of that partnering at the prime sub program office level that isn't always typical.
Excellent. Al, from a commercial perspective, what does proactive design look like?
Proactive design?
Yes.
So, a big part of it is what Kelly just said, is that there's a long history of developments. And people here who remembers Orbital Express, so there are already refueling demonstrations been performed by the U.S. We're actually working on a program right now called Tetra. This is public, which is going to, I think all this is public, going to do refueling in GEO with a variety of technologies. So proactive, we pull forward any kind of capabilities, not only in industry, but in the federal labs. We partner with Lawrence Livermore National Labs, with NASA Glenn, with JPL, MIT Lincoln Lab, in pulling forward technologies and not reinventing things. There's a lot out there, and then there's a lot more published by universities. We partner with a lot of universities because they have decades of developments and very intentional first of research and theses from PhDs. That's number one, is you don't need to go out there and invent a whole lot in order to get really capable systems going. Satellite servicing has a long history, as I mentioned, everything from the shuttle days all the way up to RSGS and Restore-L and OSAMs and other things that are going on. So we have done a number of things that have pulled forward technologies, partnered with others that are working on and investments, and then we are fortunate to have a large pool of private investments that we can use in order to acquire companies, acquire capabilities, or invest organically in order to be able to build a capability. I mentioned Edge Autonomy, the UAS company we acquired. They are very rapid in developing technologies, but they only sell and deploy products. They do not sell NRE. They deliver products to the field, and it's a very unique and different kind of business than ours. And that is the kind of the Uber, invest ahead of. But that requires a close collaboration with a warfighter, with an acquisition chain, in order to make sure you know what is going to be requested as far as delivering a product, because all the engineering has to be done up front, and then you're in a manufacturing and production mode. Space isn't quite there yet, but I think we need to, and we are heading more in that direction.
So I kind of want a perspective from both government and commercial, because I think not all threats are nation state. What is the number one bottleneck that you have in bringing this innovation to on orbit and to ensure that we're meeting the nation state threats?
I can tell you that the biggest bottleneck for me is the bureaucracy, the red tape, right? Our inability to move quickly. I look to organizations like Space RCO to leverage their processes across the entirety of the space community to actually get after how dynamic space is. So I think you guys set the example, sir. I wish the rest of the government space community would leverage the same processes for acquisitions, because again, space is dynamic. It moves quickly. If we leverage this traditional acquisitions process, by the time these capabilities are deliverable, they might no longer be relevant, right? When we look at the cyber community as well, as dynamic it is, I think we need to start focusing on space through that lens, as opposed to some of the traditional Air Force lenses that we've looked at when developing out systems.
Kelly, do you have another government perspective, or is the bureaucracy also what weighs you
Well,
down?
it is, but I'll go a little bit more granular and give maybe a couple different examples. One of the only specific, I'll say, authority or exemption we have is a JSIDS exemption in terms of our requirements. So JSIDS is a Joint Capability Integrated Development System. It's how most programs of record get their approved, validated requirements to go pursue a material solution and spend taxpayer dollars on a big program. That process can take 2, 4, 6 years to coordinate a set of requirements through the Pentagon. We don't do that. So like I said, we basically take requirements directly from the combatant commands or from the service and then get a validated stamp of approval from the Secretary of the Air Force to say, go do that program. And we will. And so that lets us start quickly. And I'll say the other thing about that, we will have a new National Defense Authorization Act here shortly. Very central in the discussion through the SPEED Act and the Forged Act is elimination of the JSIDS process writ large for all of DoD. That can speed things up. That can also potentially lead to some chaos and some duplicative efforts because what do you get out of spending all those years coordinating your requirements? Everybody knows what you're trying to do. Everybody gets a say, and you deconflict stuff. So there's pros and cons, but I think there will be major reform on the requirements process on the front end to let us be way more dynamic up front to start pursuing solutions. The other pieces, as I mentioned, are all the colors of money that we have. And so again, I am funded in a program of record. It's not an official A acquisition category program. I am DoD 5000 exempt, which is the full bureaucracy that most acquisition organizations use. Missile Defense Agency is exempt from the DoD 5000. Other RCOs and the Army RICTO are exempt. And so, they can craft strategies and have delegated authorities inside their organizations where they don't have to go back to the Pentagon to get everything approved in major review events. And that's one way that we'll be able to go faster. But the money I have, like I said, is kind of at the build operational kit for the warfighter. I do not have money to seed the TechMat baseline for the types of new capabilities that we're trying to adopt, whether that be agile bus technology or space combat kit or refueling. Others have to do that for me, and that's difficult to get that unity of effort to bring, I'll say, AFRL, DIU, SpaceWorks, AFWorks, the assured access to space portfolio who has the refueling and the space logistics piece. How do you get all these folks on the same page when they all have different sources of money, different reporting chains? It's difficult to bring all those pieces together. And so I think we will need, I'm glad Al put that chart up there, national will to drive the collaboration where we have to have it, whether that's for Golden Dome, whether that's for space superiority. I see that coming as we go through this budget cycle with reconciliation and other things that are coming. I think we'll have big pushes in those two areas. And then if we have, a Secretary of Defense and a deputy who are willing to remove obstacles, there's hope. There's hope that maybe we can keep up and maybe defeat our potential adversaries. But without that, we'll keep wallowing in the mud.
Al, do you want to provide the other side of the fence and what you see as the bottlenecks?
Yeah, well, I don't want to deprive anybody of eye candy, so I'll show my last chart here. So I think one of the challenges in the space industry is that we are relatively limited in our supply chain volume and production, especially at consistent reliability. So we have bottlenecks in photovoltaics. Yeah. We have bottlenecks in pressure tanks. We have a number of just limitations, and it's for good reason. I mean, there hasn't been a sustainable volume of orders and revenue for companies to sustain themselves in that. But in a world where true proliferation, in the sense of dropping prices so that large volumes of thousands, hundreds of thousands can be procured of anything, we would be limited. And we would be especially limited if it's a domestic supply chain only type of situation. So we do have challenges in that regard. I think warfighting is not restricted to any one domain. So if space is going to be relevant, it needs to be relevant on a large scale. It needs to be able to match and operate in a proliferated autonomous vehicles warfighting domain, which in sea, marine, and air is heading in the thousands of units or more type of operation. So those are the kind of the constraints that I see from a manufacturing perspective that we have to tackle as an industry. Some of it is being addressed with commercial parts using approaches to be radiation tolerant operation, but it's still a really tough environment to be operating in general. Just surviving launch has proven to be a challenge for most newcomers to the industry that want to do things differently. So you shouldn't underestimate the complexity of growing the supply chain and the integration ability for space.
That actually drives the question then, should there be policy changes to help address, so I think you talked a little bit about sort of the overarching, that perennial goal of changing our acquisitions actually fast. But are there other policy shifts that might address, a comprehensive industrial-based policy for space or something like that addresses some of these other issues? Met with silence.
I would say I would mimic some of the talking points that you had earlier, sir, with regard to kind of moving away from some of those traditional FAR requirements and moving towards some of those more unique things like OTAs, commercial service offerings, service-based contracts, different things that the Department of Defense can do to really get after these capabilities more quickly. But I'll hand it on back over to you, sir, to expand on those a little more.
Well, okay, so I guess supply chain, we see it as well in terms of our offers. I will commend the Space Development Agency, and I hear a lot of commercial industry commend them for a steady set of orders every 2 years, tranches, where they're trying to stimulate the industrial base and build a supply. Okay, so that's one. We see in our case, we don't have that. We're not building hundreds of satellites in tranches, so they're most often unique systems with first-of capabilities that maybe haven't been built before, so we have to take other alternative approaches, but we have the same types of parts. So what are we doing? We are working with our partners on capital buys of parts to have things in inventory, and then we'll buy them back from them. So we will authorize long lead parts procurements like after SRR, System Requirements Review, instead of CDR or PDR, so that they can get a year or two, head start on those things. We have actually even negotiated what we call bonded storage agreements with some of the microelectronics suppliers. Well, they will go buy parts from their supply base, and they'll put them into storage for us when they don't even have a contract with us. They're a second or a third tier supplier, but these are the types of things we're going to have to do. I think those types of policy things are going to have to become more widespread. You have the Office of Strategic Capital. I don't know exactly what they do. They're right. I'm not sure any of us do. They have a bunch of money, and they can authorize loans to try to invest in the industrial base, but I think we need to do more of that. And Victor actually mentioned this. We have to find some way to get past ITAR and MCTL type considerations, military critical technologies lists, because innovation is not limited to the United States. There are actually some amazing international companies doing things that are not being done here, that are capabilities I would like to get my hands on. I've been trying to do that for a couple years. For me, the security challenges are major. And so we have to figure out how to remove some of those barriers and reduce classification, which is always something we want to talk about when we talk about space. And I will say finally, after a couple years, we're maybe making some progress internal to the Space Force. There are a series of forums where proposals are being brought forward to downgrade certain things, talk more openly. We're making small progress, but I think the floodgate might burst on that pretty quickly. Again, with this administration, their interest in space, their interest in going fast. If you limit yourself to those types of channels with very limited need to know and very secure infrastructure, it slows you down, and you lose access to a lot of the industrial base and innovation base that's out there worldwide. So we're going to have to figure out ways to address that too.
Perfect.
And I'd say something you said earlier too, so it really resonates with me with regard to commercial information. So how do we get past those overly classified things within the U.S. government? In my opinion, we leverage the commercial enterprise. We look to you guys to be able to get after those threats. Because what I see through our Orbital Watch initiative as we move towards phase 2 and open up an ability to bilaterally communicate back to the U.S. government, what I want to do with that is I want to take that threat information that you guys are gathering from your commercial systems that's fully not just unclassified, it's non-classified. Right. Raw information that we can then disseminate across internally within the government and even potentially share with our allies and partners and reduce that overclassification friction. So again, we look to you guys to help us solve that problem, because when it comes to sanitizing classification, especially in the space domain, it's going to take a long time to really get it out to you.
Great. All right, so let's shift to our sort of future outlook. And actually, if you could go to the next slide, you can also submit questions, and we'll hopefully have some time to answer questions from the audience. But sort of thinking about the threats, technologies, and operational shifts that are likely to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, what should we be doing to prepare now? As Al said, you can't have this conversation without talking about AI and autonomy. So maybe, Al, do you want to talk about what you see some of those future shifts might look like?
Yeah, so just on AI, first of all, independent of space, there's been a lot of gyrations with regards to adoption of AI tools, concerns about IP, cybersecurity, security, privacy, all of that. And I think we need to have industry frameworks that allow for barriers, to allow tools to be used without leakage of information. I think that's a hurdle that we need to quickly get to. And by we, the enterprise tools that we're already using, the Microsoft tools and the Oracle tools and so forth, already are starting to start adopting AI tools, whether it's Copilot or others, data analytics tools. We need to get those integrated so that we can operate at the speed and the efficiency. And yeah, that does mean staffing efficiency as well as time efficiency that it promises. I think as a nation and our industrial base is going to depend on that, but our warfighters are going to depend on that as well. So that's one of the things that we're working on and we're integrating into our digital ecosystem that I talked about earlier, is the necessity for those kind of capabilities. And then the edge computing is the other aspect that we're really excited about and pushing on, and even taking risks on our own nickel is thinking about what is the possibility of a platform that we can fly on UAS and a version of the same platform that we can fly in space that runs, machine vision, AI algorithms, autonomy, fault detection, isolation recovery, and then joint domain autonomy, knowing what the mission is, knowing what's operational and where they can get effect from both domains or all domains. So those are the kind of things that I think in the next few years are going to be accelerating and going to be necessary to keep up with our peers.
Excellent. For Victor.
Can I jump in real quick on that? Because so 2 years ago, we had a reverse industry day for artificial intelligence out at Microsoft headquarters. And I made the statement there that I'll make again here. It'd be a great challenge problem for a combined academic lab team. The problem with current cybersecurity protocols is you have to specifically identify every piece of code, every line of code, every port. It's extremely rigid. By definition, artificial intelligence learns and changes its code baseline. So the entire way we do cybersecurity currently has to change. Or you will never certify any of these AI-enabled systems. So I just wanted to put that out there and say, we see the same vision. We are going to try to adopt some of these things, but back to policy and process, some work needs to be done there to change the way of thinking. And actually, super interesting, I can't remember the lady's name. I think she's the current acting DoD CIO. She keeps saying in the news, the risk management framework we're using right now is stupid and she's going to blow it up. I don't know what she plans to replace it with. Maybe if any of you know, you can come find me and tell me, but I'd be very curious because I think that's exactly right. I think we have to do that, but I don't know what the solution is at this point to replace it with. Again, maybe some great ideas out here in the audience.
Victor, how can commercial and government actors shape norms and behaviors in space now to prevent escalation later?
I would say through better collaboration. I think with regard to that Orbital Watch initiative I've talked about earlier, if we could collaborate and share threat information better with the commercial enterprise, I think that could kind of shift the narrative in the space domain. If we can enable our commercial enterprise to mitigate threats and reduce the likelihood of threats while operating on orbit, I think that could shift the tide for them. And if we can enable them to make their systems more resilient to meet those threats, that's a great way forward. But with regard to working with additional organizations to kind of get after that threat, we do want to consolidate that information into our system as much as possible. I think with commercial integration, we often focus on integration pretty heavily because it's in the name, right? That's kind of the sexy part of commercial integration is those cool capabilities and how do we get them inside of our systems. But what we're overlooking sometimes is some of the more critical foundational aspects of commercial integration, like the identify piece. How do we identify what's out there? How do we understand what's available? And how do we know who's who in the zoo and who's actually talking to who in the government, where these commercial vendors are heading and where they're moving? I think enabling a system that helps us understand that is going to help us more rapidly and more responsibly acquire capabilities for commercial integration.
Great. Kelly, what are you thinking about to better posture Space RCO to perform in these future environments?
So we are leaning in on automation as well. We have a program called the Rapid Resilient Command and Control Program. It is the tactical C2 SATOps software that we are building for the space warfight. It's a combined program office actually with SSC. And there are several very unique elements to that. It's cloud-based. It's leveraging commercial AWS cloud capabilities in an ultra-secure environment at the SAPSAR level with with cyber defenses, and that gets to one of the bottlenecks that we have had that we didn't call out specifically, is when you have these stovepipes with acquisition organizations, chains of command and funding, you end up developing systems that are stovepiped and do not talk to each other and are not interoperable. And that's another thing that we're biting off in the Space Force right now. A lot of pressure from General Purdy and others, and you'll have it from General Gutwein with going, how do you make these systems talk to each other? So you have to have a common operating environment, a common security posture. You have to have well-defined interfaces and message formats and standards. Everybody can't make up their own stuff anymore. And so we have a program to do that essentially at the end of kill chains for the space warfight. And that is the solution. And we're trying to drive alignment between both the operational C2 work that's going on out at SSC with our tactical C2 stuff with commercial. And I'll just say the last piece of that gets to somewhat of what Victor was just talking about. Kind of an experiment we were doing on this program is we actually went out and hired 20 expert software developing small businesses, not space guys necessarily, people who write software for a living. And we're putting them in this environment. We're teaching them what functions need to be done for operations of satellites in a dynamic environment, but we want expert commercial software developers, because otherwise you end up, and I'll say it, you end up with an OCX, you end up with Atlas, you end up with the bottom 5 acquisition programs in the Space Force for the last decade. And that's not what, we can't have that. Right? That's where we started, is we have to have pace of effort to deliver capabilities, and we can't go off in a closet and write software for 10 years before we get operating software that gives us real capability. And so that's one of the main things we're doing in addition to all the other things we're talking about today. That's probably our most important program. I'll say that the Space Force only has a couple of programs, and Al mentioned this with his chart on multi-domain. So Secretary Kendall, Secretary of the Air Force in the last administration, stood up a program office called the C3BM Program Office under General Cropsey. Basically took Air Battle Management System, JADC2, Joint All-Domain, Command and Control, smashed it all together, said, it's your problem, dude. Go fix it out. Go fix it. And the R2C2 program that we have is part of the software baseline for that. The Kronos program out of SSC is part of the software. Those are the only 2 Space Force programs in that, but that's how we're having to integrate multi-domain, because he's solving the rest of the air, maritime, ground campaign, and we have to plug into his environment. And so they're driving some of those standards and interoperability questions as well. Most progress I've seen in 30 years in making these systems talk to each other.
Actually, so I feel like you've also teed up what are the investments we need to make now to be successful in the future? And it sounds certainly the IT infrastructure, everyone's favorite topic, but it's one of those investments we really need to put the resources against now to position us well in the future. And so are there any other sort of investments that we should be making as a nation now to position us to be successful down the road?
Absolutely. And as I've been getting at earlier as well, is mitigating barriers to data integration across those disparate organizations in the space community. We need to understand what is going on in those siloed organizations in the space domain if we want to be able to actually get after these threats. And that's what we're working to do. We are developing out a system to be able to mitigate those silos of information out there, and totally understand that there are some sensitivities from some organizations, especially like Space RCO, with regard to that information that they're going to be looking for in the system. So we do have the capability to develop out different instances within our system for those unique organizations that have those sensitivities with regard to commercial integration. But that's what we really need. We need a one-stop shop, again, not just for the commercial industry to go to, but for the government to go to be able to really quickly identify those solutions to their needs. Because this is something that if we don't figure out today, we're going to be scrambling to figure it out in times of contingency and crisis, and it's going to put us at a little bit of a disadvantage in those times.
Absolutely. So we have some excellent questions from the audience, and I will do the top one, which I'm a little surprised hasn't come up until now, which of course is nukes in space.
Yeah, okay.
And how do we balance between commercial opportunities with threats like in-space nuclear events? What is that cost of resilience? Who wants to touch that one?
I'm not sure well, all right, I'm not sure how I can answer the cost of resilience, but I'll say a couple of talking points from the service. One, putting nuclear weapons in space is an irresponsible act by an irresponsible actor in a domain that should be available for all of us for peaceful use of space and other things that we all want as a world of humans. So we don't want to go there, but people are going there. So now what are we gonna do about it? There's a whole range of resiliency measures, including different orbital regimes that you can go into to avoid the threat. You can try to harden. We are looking at remediation capabilities. We are looking at environmental characterization. If the environment is spoiled with a nuclear event in space, when does it either naturally remediate, or when could we actually do something artificially to help remediate that? So there's a wide set of response options that are being considered right now. We're actually waiting, I'll say, in this budget cycle to see whether we make a commitment to do those types of things. And it's certainly viewed as a very predominant threat by this Secretary of Defense, and they basically said we need to figure out how to respond to this and not pretend like it's not real.
Another thing to bring up, and I think Al might be a good one to talk at this, because this is the first time, this is another obvious one, which is cyber threats. And how is that changing the current space ecosystem?
Sure. Well, cyber threats are basically everywhere now. It's space systems and autonomous systems in general are a challenge. Some of the capabilities we have at Redwire are to look at those threats in our systems, everything from star trackers and GNC sensors into the avionics into payloads. So we do some self-assessment of that, but it's a never-ending challenge because the threats evolve and threat vectors evolve. Software is continually updated, processors become obsolete, and architectures update. So it's a never-ending process. Quite frankly, resilience to that. It isn't that you aren't going to get attacked or you stop all attacks. It's what do you do when you do get attacked? That's the real question. And how do you operate through a degraded mode? How do you determine that you are being, attacked? And a lot of enterprises, terrestrial enterprises, are dealing with that in their, infrastructure already. And we're shadowing and operating in that way in space as well. So I don't think there's anything sacred that we can ignore in space, and we're taking it head on in that regard. It will always be vulnerable to some form of cyber attacks is the bottom line.
All right. Victor, I'm going to have this one on you. What do you think needs to change in public perception and sentiment around these threats, and how can the media help or hurt in conveying the message?
I think we need to advocate for more transparency in the threats. I know Dr. Hammett touched on that a little earlier with regard to sharing information with the commercial enterprise. I think that could help with the perception, is to just help the public understand what's really out there. And there are some organizations out there that get after explaining what the threats are, specifically with regard to cybersecurity. There is the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center that does offer information on potential cyber threats to systems to help vendors become a little more resilient and mitigate those threats, at least in the cyber domain. But absolutely, I think just being a little more transparent and open of the reality of those threats could help with that perception.
Great. Kelly, I think this one is going to be good for you. And this is sort of talking through how the acquisition community does that transition into the operational community, and ensuring that that's a seamless transition, and ensure that you have proven military utility.
Yeah, so it's quite a challenge, I will tell you again, given seams and cultural differences. And all of the things that we have been discussing today are touched upon. So the operational warfighter has a different view about cybersecurity than the acquisition community does. But I will say they're starting to get closer in alignment. General Purdy has in particular directed all the acquisition programs in the Space Force to implement certain minimum levels of cyber security in the systems. What often happens, and this has happened on programs like mine, remote modular terminals, which I can talk about in public. It's a ground-based SATCOM jammer that I talk about relatively often. It was actually one of the major hurdles to fielding was to get Space Operations Command to agree to connect the systems to the dev environment to the data center. So it was cyber related, and they had the call because it was going to become an operational system when it was fielded. So if you're not on the same page in terms of cybersecurity posture as you're getting toward the fielding, decision point, you're not going to be successful. They're going to say, I don't want to accept the risk on this and put it into operations. So cyber is one. I will just say that we have an entire dedicated office that works routinely with Space Operations Command and with U.S. Space Command and other combatant commanders to work these processes. The basing process for the Space Force is fairly immature. Putting systems all over the world, terrestrial systems, is difficult, and you have to have international agreements in place. You have to have agreements with other militaries, whether we're going to be operating systems in their country or they're going to be operating them as part of a coalition force. Very complicated, and we're right in the middle of all this right now as we try to bring stuff to the field. I will say we don't necessarily have all the answers, but there's a growing awareness of the complexities at the headquarters and trying to refine roles and responsibilities so that we're better at it as we keep going through more iterative cycles.
Excellent. All right, so we are coming up at the end of our panel, so I have one last question for each of you. What is the single most important thing we must get right to ensure U.S. space security and resilience over the next 5 years? No pressure.
I would say that we absolutely must enable ourselves to rapidly be able to identify, integrate, and operationalize commercial capabilities prior to contingency and crisis operations if we want to maintain that strategic advantage over our adversaries. That was a long one.
I think that's a great one. I'll expand it even further. It's not just commercial. I rolled out a cool little acronym at the State of the Space Industrial Base Conference a few months ago. For the space community, we talk about TT&C all the time. I talk about TT&C. Teamwork, trust, transparency, and commitment. And that's how, I think that's the single most important thing, is we cannot be divided in our efforts. We cannot be working at cross purposes. We cannot be competing against each other. We cannot be refusing to accept commercial data. We cannot be refusing to interoperate with other systems that are coming online. It is a full-up team sport, national level of effort that I think is required, and we're working toward that. But again, it's hard. It's hard to get everybody on the same page and rowing in the same direction.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll just double emphasize that. I think the ability to focus our investments, private investments, and our intellectual powers and entrepreneurial powers, we can dominate, no question, and just being able to do that in the next 5 years, and we'll be okay.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank my panel for a fantastic discussion in an unclassified environment, so bravo for that. Thank you all.
Thank you.